I'm Steve Patrick, Vice President of the Aspen Institute, Executive Director of the Forum for Community Solutions. We are thrilled to have you here and excited to kick off our annual convening virtually this year. I want to welcome the network in and apologize that we had to do this virtually, but also express my deep appreciation for Monique Miles and the team at the Forum for Community Solutions who have helped to put this together. It's a real pleasure to join you, and we're looking forward to what's going to be a powerful gathering online. I can't believe the caliber of folks we've got talking today and tomorrow, and we're glad you're with us. If we had met in person, it would have been sometime in November, and we would have found ourselves this year gathering with the Hopi community in Arizona and visiting Laguna and Jemez Pueblos in New Mexico. We're sorry we couldn't do that because of COVID, but we will do that in the future when it's safe for all, and we're really looking forward to that opportunity. I want to make some notes about what we've done as a national network. These are really hard times, as we all know. The triple pandemic of both COVID, the economic downturn, and an overdue reckoning around structural and institutional racism in our country. Now we're also dealing with these horrific apocalyptic fires in the West, and our hearts go out to all who have been impacted by all of these incredibly difficult forces in our country. Meanwhile, the work continues, and we're really proud of the work that each of you are doing on the ground and in your community and in your national networks. It's a powerful, powerful antidote to the malaise that strikes our country. So thank you for your work. At the OYF, we've pivoted to more virtual strategies. We know that we want to wrap our arms around youth and young adults and support them, but we've done what we needed to do to get online, create virtual tools, push for youth employment to stay activated in the summer with a virtual youth employment strategy. We've also made rapid response grants to a set of communities. We continue to make investments in youth-led change and in trauma-informed work with our youth and young adults, and that work will continue. We've also made great progress on data, and we appreciate the depth of work that folks are doing on the ground to be able to actually use data to drive greater impact. We're proud of new communities that have joined the OYF, from the Twin Cities to the Pueblos of Jemez and Laguna and Taos, Missoula, Montana, San Antonio, and Houston. Welcome, and we look forward to welcoming more communities into the network in the months ahead. We also are proud of some of the new grants we've made around scaling pathways for opportunity youth, and in partnership with JP Morgan Chase and others. And so we see momentum in this work, even as this crisis in our country has caused some setbacks that are undeniable. But we're going to go forward, and we're going to go forward in partnership with all of you, in partnership with the youth and young adults as change makers and agents in this work. And we'll continue to be focused on the power of your work in places across this country, which brings us to the opening plenary. The National Opportunity Youth Forum is deeply committed to and invested in the power of place. We believe that communities have the power and insight to address their most pressing challenges. And we have watched events unfold over the several months across the country. Now more than ever, we know that place matters. The panel that Melody Barnes will be chairing in a minute features highly regarded national leaders who also have deep, strong, significant ties to place. They have been at the center of and are leading on affecting change in place. The timing couldn't be better to bring these leaders together to reflect on what we have learned from place-based efforts and to help us in our current work. Learn how to make these lessons into the future and to focus on things like community power building that ensures that the people who are most impacted by the issues are at the center of problem identification and solution design. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to kick it over to the chair of the Forum for Community Solutions. I want to thank Melody Barnes for her steadfast commitment to this work, for an incredible leadership. And I invite Melody to introduce the panel and kick off our annual conference. Thank you, Mel.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And I cannot tell you how happy I am to be with all of you, even though it is virtual. We are thrilled that you have gathered with us yesterday, today, tomorrow, so that we can spend our time together. And I'm particularly excited about the panel that you're about to hear from. As Steve mentioned, we know the power of place. Everyone who's on this Zoom call knows the power of place. And we know that for generations, communities have harvested, have harnessed that power. And in fact, I can say that for much of this past summer, I have been witness to and socially distanced appropriately, but a part of that same kind of power in my own hometown of Richmond, Virginia. We saw a lot of that this summer and the kind of transformation that it can bring. This plenary session brings together national leaders who also understand that power and who have been doing this work for many, many years. And they're going to discuss with us the power of place and the power of and the history behind community organizing and community power building. I cannot tell you how excited I am about the panel. I have had the opportunity to work with each and every member of this panel, and I am pleased to say that I am proud that they are also friends. So please help me welcome the members of this panel. First of all, well, actually, none of them need any introduction, but I'm going to do this briefly anyway. First of all, we have Jeff Canada with us. As you all know, Jeff is the president of the Harlem Children's Zone and a visionary, a person of deep compassion, a person who blazed trails in the work that he did, not only in Harlem, but really for the rest of the country, and showing us how transformation can take place in place. Janet Murguia is a person that I learned when I moved to Washington many, many years ago, that if you want something done, you should call Janet Murguia. And in fact, we've known each other for so long that her organization has actually undergone a name change. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about that and the power of branding, the power of name change. She's currently the president and CEO of Unitas US. And then Kimberly Teehee. Kimberly and I had the opportunity to work together in the White House when she was the first person to lead the work for the Native American community in the White House, in the Domestic Policy Council. She's now the delegate designee to the US House of Representatives for the Cherokee Nation. And again, I am thrilled that all of you have joined us this morning to talk about the power that exists in our communities and on the ground. I want to start out by asking you, Jeff, the first question. As I mentioned, you started the Harlem's Children's Zone, and I think we all know the power of what you did in that community that led to similar kind of work that has taken place all over the country in communities all over the country. You had a deep belief in what could happen in community. And in fact, as I understand it, you told your funders that if you can't make change in the community, that they shouldn't give you the money, that they should take back the money, which is a powerful statement in and of itself. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, based on the work that you did at HCZ, what you learned from the success there. What's embedded in the success of that kind of work taking place in a particular community?
Thank you, Melody. It's so great to work with you again. I think, like everybody on the panel, you're just one of those folks that we know how deeply you care about this work and how important you have been to this work. And I did tell the funders, if we didn't produce results, to take the money. I was younger, maybe a little more bold at that time. But what drove me was that I thought we were doing a great job until I started looking at the data. And having spent 10 years working really hard and thinking we were successful, and then the data saying, you know what, this is not powerful enough. These sort of individual strategies we were doing, some of it gang prevention, some of it teen pregnancy, but no comprehensive strategy, wasn't able to move the needle in Harlem. It really made me think that all of that hard work, it was good, we were saving some kids, but it was not the answer. And part of this was saying there needs to be an answer. So what have I learned? So we've been at this for 20 years. First of all, what I've learned is what we thought would work will work, right? If you invest significant amount of talent and time and resources into poor children and families, and you do it over a sustained period of time, and you do it in a comprehensive way, you will see results that move these families out of poverty. And 20 years later, we got the evidence, we've got the data, we say it works. So that's the first thing, it does work. Second thing, it is hard. It is really hard. And if you face a time like we're facing right now, and let this stop you from holding up these high goals we have for our communities, I think time after time we were faced with the crack epidemic, threw us off our game. We were faced with the tech crash, threw us off our game. But we kept saying, keep your eye on the prize. Focus on making sure that you can deliver these supports to families as best you can, even in the toughest times. That if you do that, these families will continue to make progress. The last thing that I'm going to say is that it takes time. There was nothing, if someone looked at our work, right, 15 years ago, they say, oh, that's just a good guy, but I just don't see evidence that this thing is going to work, right? It took a while for us, about 10 years, before we really had the kind of data that folks, the researchers could come in and look at and say, oh, that thing is really working. So part of this is you need folks who are going to support you over time. Now, we had lots of preliminary indicators that things were going in the right direction. But because our North Star was children graduating college, getting jobs, it took us 10 or 12 years before we saw evidence of that happening. So those are some of the things I learned in that period of time.
I am sure that what you just said resonates with our audience. I mean, one sounds like, in part, what you knew based on being a part of the community would be successful was something that you wanted to bank on, but you also combined that with the use of data and the recognition that it was going to take time, which is not only a message for people working in community, but is also a message for funders and for philanthropists to understand that, as we often say, you're not going to change life cycle problems on a grant cycle timeline. I'm wondering how you've taken those lessons and translated them to the work that you're doing now with the Institute.
Yeah. So, I decided that I was going to create the William Julius Wilson Institute. First of all, I love Bill Wilson. He changed my way of thinking about poverty. And I think he was just one of the great researchers and great writers. But this is what I realized. After 20 years, I've made about every mistake you could make. But I never made the same mistake twice. And my theory is I want to help folks learn from what we have, experienced over those 20 years to help, supercharge these efforts around the country. When we started the work, there was a real belief that when I first tried to get funding, people said, oh, no one could do it, right? You just could not go into these historically underinvested places that had these horrible outcomes and actually change them at scale. So after 10 years, people say, oh, well, you could do it, but nobody else could do it. And that was also not true. Now we have evidence other people are doing it around the country. What they lack, in my opinion, they have lacked the kind of significant resources we've had, the kind of technical assistance that I got very early on. I mean, we were the first test case for Bridgespan and building a business plan for this work. And some of the I think experiences that we went through, we think can be helpful to other folks who are interested in doing the same kind of work. I think that's what got me out of retirement. By the way, I enjoyed my retirement, and I really recommend it. I was retired for 7 years. I really recommend it. I don't care what people say. You'll hate it. I didn't hate it. But this issue of can we save America's children? And I'm not. This sounds like maybe hyperbole, but I'm not kidding. Can we actually do it at numbers that will make a difference in this country? I think the answer is those of us who believe we can do it, we have to stand up right now, and we have to get in the game, and we have to push this envelope and make sure that all of us are succeeding. And if that's on our Native American reservation, it's with Latinx community, that all of us just have to come together and work together to figure out how we solve these problems, because they are complicated, and sometimes they are a little scary, and sometimes we're overwhelmed by what's coming in the door. And we want to be helped. We want to raise our hands and say to folks, if you're serious about this work, we want to help you be successful.
Great. That's fantastic. I'm glad you enjoyed retirement. I'm glad that you came out of it for that reason. So thank you. And Janet, I want to turn to you. As I mentioned, we have worked together over many, many years, and over so many years that NCLR has changed its name. And I want to talk to you about that, because often in our work, we talk about the power of narrative. We talk about the power of branding, the power of language. And I'm curious if you can tell us why you all decided to do that and what you learned in that process.
Well, thank you, Melody. And I'm really so pleased to be part of this incredible panel today, and honored to be included. Appreciate your leadership and your interest in making sure that people, and especially our young people, understand the importance and the power of data and of narrative and of change and what it requires to create change. I felt like Jeffrey's comments and his vision for all of us to be bold and to think about how we can create that change is something that has inspired me, and I know many others. For us, we have a way to look at our work, and it's been about people, it's been about proximity, and about power. And we looked at our network, and basically at Unidos US, we are the largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the country. We started in 1968 when there was an emergence of organizations that really wanted to take on the war on poverty. And they understood that place, people, and proximity mattered. And so basically we created a network of organizations that could help in responding to lift everyone, but especially in including the Latino community and the unique challenges they faced. So over the course of those almost 50 years, we grew that network, and we supported them in helping create the ability for our community to succeed and the opportunity. So through programs and services on the ground, trying to target what Jeffrey talked about, resources, technical assistance to those groups on the ground so that they could create this network of helping to expand opportunity for our communities. We also have been a voice of advocacy, understanding that we do need to change policies. And when you can intersect programs with policies, that's where you get impact to all of that. It's been really important. We saw our growth over the course of those 50 years. So when we approached our anniversary, and I had just started as president and CEO of then NCLR, we decided in approaching that 50th anniversary milestone, we should take stock of our mission and our brand. And what we found is unanimous support for our mission. People absolutely understood why it was important to create programs and to create policies through this network to help our community to advance. But what we found, and this is where data comes into play, is that not everybody, as we approached our 50th anniversary, understood what that question some of us just saw in the chat meant. What does NCLR stand for? It didn't mean anything at the time for so many of our younger cohorts. So NCLR actually stood for, when we started, we were actually the Southwest Council of La Raza in 1968, representing 7 organizations in the Southwest. As time moved on, we became the National Council of La Raza because our network grew. And then everybody, just for convenience sake, decided just to drop all of that, and we were NCLR. But that name, that brand, as we approached our 50th anniversary, did not resonate, especially with the younger cohort. And so the data showed us that not only had we as a demographic, Latinos and Hispanics, changed the country, we still today, the latest census for this past year shows that the Latino community, the Hispanic community, the Latinx community represent 50% of the growth of population in the United States. So we clearly are changing the country, but what we learned in that experiment, Melody, was that we had changed. We were not the same Latino community in 2018 that we were in 1968. We used to be predominantly a Mexican American community. We still have large representation, but we're not monolithic. We have seen that growth of diversity within our community, and we're very young. 6 out of 10 Latinos are millennials or younger. We marry outside of our community more than any other race or ethnicity. We love everyone, and apparently everyone loves us. And so we saw that because of that change, we needed to rethink how we could continue to grow and be an inclusive organization. Whereas NCLR and the National Council of La Raza was seen as an exclusive organization. That's what the data showed. And so we had to really rethink, should we use this milestone moment as we're looking at the future and the next chapter of our mission that is so strong and important, to think about how we can signal more inclusivity. So we stepped back, we looked at the options, and we decided that we needed to come together, and we wanted to come together as a community. And again, our community had become more diverse. In fact, 24% of our community today self-identify as Afro-Latino. We needed to represent everyone who believes in opportunity to come together, and we wanted to create an invitation for others to join us. So we landed on Unidos US because Unidos means united. It means coming together. And this has never been a more important time for us to come together for that common vision of an inclusive America that we know means a strong America. A diversity is a strength for our country, and we want to make sure everyone can embrace that and leverage that strength for the future of our country and for everyone.
That is a really powerful story. And I love the fact that you talked about both self-reflection, understanding who you all are as an organization, the transformation of the community and the organization, the invitation to come in. So it's both a matter of self-reflection and looking inward, and at the same time, determining how you were going to engage more broadly, which is, I think, a powerful story, and connecting that data to a narrative that you wanted to share with the country. And Kimberly, that makes me also think about issues of belonging, issues of power building that are critical to the Native American community. And I think we would all argue that the history of the Native American community in the United States and North America is a story of both survival and resilience. It is infuriating and it is inspiring, all at the same time. And I know from the work that we were able to do together that you are the perfect person for the position that you hold as the delegate designee. And I'm wondering if you can tell us more about that position and why it exists and the kind of work that you've been doing, but you would hope to do in that position. How does that fit inside this larger, the narrative that we're talking about, but also this idea of power building?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Melody, for the invitation to join this very important conversation. And I am so glad that, that there was at least a plan in the works to go to Hopi Reservation. And I'm sure once we get past the COVID pandemic, we will once again be able to convene in person. Thank you for that question too. Last September, our newly elected Principal Chief, Chuck Hoskin Jr., appointed me to be Cherokee Nation's delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives. And our Tribal Council, which is our legislative body, unanimously approved my appointment. Why this position exists is because Cherokee Nation's right to have a delegate in Congress is vested in 3 treaties with the United States. We have a 1785 treaty that speaks to having a deputy. We have another treaty, our 1835 treaty, which is actually our removal treaty, that has very clear language that Cherokee Nation shall have a delegate in the U.S. House of Representatives whenever Congress makes provision for the same. It's not discretionary, it's clear. There's another treaty, our 1866 treaty, which is our last treaty with the United States. It reaffirmed all the prior treaties. And so those treaties are a direct result of early 19th century policy of the United States to try to expand through the Appalachian Mountains to Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina. You also had concurrently Georgia trying to enforce its state laws on the reservation of the tribe. You had a U.S. Supreme Court decision, all taking place in the 30s. At the time, Cherokee Nation had a constitution. We had law enforcement. We had our own syllabary. Sequoia is known for inventing our syllabary. We had a very literate community, and we had our own newspaper. We had a functioning economy, mostly agriculture, but a very functioning economy. We didn't want to move. And so this led to a U.S. Supreme Court decision in which the High Court agreed that Georgia's laws had no place within the Cherokee Nation. The president at the time was Andrew Jackson, who is attributed with saying John Marshall, who was the Chief Justice at the time, made his decision, now let him enforce it. As a result, an unauthorized faction of Cherokees signed the removal treaty of 1835, and what ensued after that is the infamous Trail of Tears, where a quarter of our population, mainly elder and children, perished during that forced march into Indian Territory, which is modern day. And the bad stuff didn't end there, Melody. It did not end there. We had a functioning economy. All of our goods and possessions were left behind. We had to rebuild a nation. The bad stuff didn't end up happening either because you had Congress who continued to pass laws that abolished our court systems, abolished our ability to rule by law, abolished our ability to elect tribal chiefs. We didn't get that back from Congress until 1975, when new policies started coming out of Congress that promoted tribal self-determination. So building our tribe again and getting a government functioning again led to a 1999 Constitutional Convention, which Chief Hoskin was a delegate to. And through that Constitutional Convention, the delegates decided they wanted to authorize the chief of the Cherokee Nation to appoint and to have the Tribal Council confirm that appointment to invoke that treaty right. So the chief of the Cherokee Nation didn't have the authority to appoint until in the 2000s. And so when Chief Hoskin came into his new position as chief, we also had a very good ruling in 2017, unrelated to the delegate issue, but that 1866 treaty was at issue. The court The federal court said, Cherokee Nation, you must comply with your treaties. You have responsibilities under that treaty that you must comply with. And that's what Chief Hoskin thought at the time. You know what? That treaty was with the United States, and the United States should also honor its treaty rights as well, and their duties and responsibilities under that treaty. The treaty was ratified by the Senate. It was signed by the President of the United States at the time, never been invalidated. It's still good law. My current work right now is I oversee the federal and state government relations for the Cherokee Nation and its businesses. I have 2 sets of staff, 2 budgets. My job is to engage Congress and policymakers about our priorities, to build alliances, to strategize in order to execute the plan. Interestingly, my job just is to execute the plan to seat my delegate position. So we had great momentum going into this year. COVID obviously shifted our priorities, and we've been focused on serving our citizens. But that's kind of where we are right now. The impact that I hope that we have is it would be a wonderful action for the United States to take action and seat the delegate. We believe it only requires House action, given that the Senate has already ratified the treaty 185 years ago. There's agreement with our current leaders in the House of Representatives, and we've got great support. We don't have a single member of the House who opposes seating the delegate. So I think it would send a huge message, an enormous, meaningful message to Indian country to have the Congress honor the United States treaty right. And it would show that treaties matter. Treaties still live, much like the U.S. Constitution lives. It would show that our voices and our histories are appreciated, and that would be very impactful to our communities.
Yeah. And I will thank you for doing what I often say is so important, which is connecting the dots. People often don't understand why we're facing the challenges we're facing today, because they don't understand how this is all connected to a history, a long history. And it's so important for that to be shared. I mean, you, Kimberly, raised the issue of COVID, kind of the momentum that you've had COVID, which we know has disproportionately impacted all of our communities. And I'm wondering, this is a question for all of you, when we think about the pandemic, that healthcare pandemic, when we think about its impact on our economy, when we think about the kind of racial justice issues that each of you has touched on, how, based on the histories that you've described, the work that you've done, what is the kind of advice that you would give to our community leaders about the best way that we can organize from the ground to deal with some of those challenges, the challenges being produced by that awful trifecta of challenges in front of us?
Melody, I'm going to, go ahead, Janet.
No, you go ahead. I'll follow you.
Well, I just have to say this, looking at this screen. If America told the true story of its history, it would talk about a people taken from their land, African Americans, to build a country on land taken from other people. What happened in the Southwest, what happened with Native Americans, the fact that that story has never been fully told is the reason that you have so many stereotypes about why certain folks have not been able to progress in this country. So I just had to say that because it's just so clear to me, looking at who you have here on this panel. It talks about a history of America that America would like to ignore. And that gets me to this other issue that we're dealing with right now, COVID, which happens to be impacting the same communities, right? I mean, we know what it's doing in the Latinx community, the Native American, the African American. It's destroying our people, and we know who's losing the jobs and the businesses, and all of those things are directly impacting our people. So there's a couple of things that I would say right off the bat. Number one, this is bad, but worse may be coming. The data seems to be clear. When you add COVID and the flu and all the other respiratory issues, from the smoke burning on the West Coast to just folks whose lungs have been polluted by environmental toxins and other things. We have to put the basic survival of our families as number one. And that to me gets to young people. Most folks my age, we're going to wear masks. We're going to try to socially distance because we understand the vulnerability. Young people just don't understand it. And in our communities, those young people are liable to bring that virus home to their families and devastate their families. You know, it can be great on a college campuses. You see all of the folks. It's not having the same impact on white upper middle class and wealthy Americans as it's having on our folks. So our kids can't do like them without the impact being severe in our communities. And so one of the things that we have to get this message out to our millennials, our young adults, that look, you got to protect your family members and your community because this next wave is definitely going to hit us again.
Yeah, I would just build, can I just build on Jeffrey's comments?
Yep.
And just say that what we've seen with COVID is really sort of an X-ray on the systemic historic inequities that have existed in our country. COVID, no question, has had a disproportionate and devastating impact on communities of color. But why? When you look at the underlying reasons as to why we have been devastated disproportionately so, there are longstanding disparities prior to COVID in our health system that have created barriers for our communities to access healthcare. Communities of color have been historically the groups most likely to lack health insurance. And because of that, we've had higher incidence of those diseases that they call comorbidities. Because of that, we are now at a higher risk of exposure to COVID and being impacted by it. I'll just give you one example with the Latino community in particular, and many in our across the spectrum, but many of our Latino workers, immigrant workers in particular, make up a disproportionate share of the essential workers that are keeping our country going right now. So they're literally putting their lives on the line. We've seen it in the farm to fork workforce industry, whether they're in the fields, in the meatpacking plants, in the grocery stores, or as first responders or daycare givers, because only 16% of Latino workers are able to work from home. If they need to put food on the table, if they need to have meet the rent, they have to take these jobs. And so therefore they're exposed at a higher level. And when they come home, they're not coming home to rooms and homes that have access to be separated from their family members. They are in close quarters most generally. So we're seeing the impact of COVID having a disproportionate effect on our communities. But the reasons why is because there has been historical, systemic, racial and ethnic disparities. And we have to address those, and we have to use policy to address them. But I agree with Jeffrey, we have to ask ourselves, why have we discriminated? Why have we had these roots of racism embedded in these systems? And we need to address that too.
Absolutely.
And Melody, I would also add to what Jeffrey and Dan. Oh.
Just hold 1 second. I just want to say to people, if you have questions, please share them with us, because we're going to go to Q&A in just a minute or two. Kimberly, please.
Sorry. I would just add to what Jeffrey and Janet were saying, and I completely agree with what they're saying too. I think all of our communities also have overcrowded housing. We have a lot of our students in school who live with their elders. And we have, for the Native American community, people in rural settings and with not easy access to healthcare facilities. And what we saw with COVID relief packages coming out of Congress was that the first Americans were the last Americans to receive access to PPE, to federal funding necessary to help their citizens. And there was continued delay. There's still litigation pending over this. And Treasury, was nearly 2 months of delay in getting funding out. And now we've got to spend all the money that we have by the end of the year. And there's no, there's no flexibility there, given we all are predicting a second wave. The scientists are predicting a second wave of COVID to plan for that. I do think that it's necessary that there's unity. We see there's power in unity and having our communities fight for each other. We saw that in CARES Act. The Native American community across the country united to be expressly mentioned in the CARES Act. As Melody can recall, in our days at the White House, I would often tell my colleagues, if Native Americans are not expressly mentioned in our policy proposals or legislative proposals, then we can assume that we are not going to be eligible recipients of whatever programs are being authorized. And that's exactly what's been happening in COVID. And we have so many agencies who don't understand what direct resources means. We're facing that now in the discussion about vaccine. But I do think education is key as well, is that we all do better when we are informed through these kinds of platforms, and we become each other's advocates as well.
And so I want to burrow in a little bit further, given one of the questions that's come up. When I think about the beginning of the summer, and I live in Richmond, Virginia now, and when I think about the beginning of the summer, if you had said to people that there's still one left, but most of the statues of monuments to Confederate generals would have been removed by the mayor, that there would have been changes made by the state legislature with regard to police reform, and the city council working on those same set of issues, that people would have said, really? That's really going to happen in our community? But I think it happened because of the power of organizing on the ground. And one of the things that I know people are curious about, given your experience and given the big challenges in front of us, how do we work across ideological differences to drive the kind of change that we know needs to take place? Share from your experiences how we can go about doing that in the most effective way.
You want me to take that first?
Please.
Well, I think that we have to find common ground first and foremost. And there's often common ground. I know it may not seem that way in a polarized country. I mean, we've seen our politics become extremely polarized. But as you said, Melody, we are also seeing opportunities to create change. And I think the tragedy of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, have created a galvanizing, a catalyzing moment, though, for eyes to be opened and to see the need for change. And when we see the need for change, I think we can show that as we come together, and it does mean we have to not necessarily partner with the same folks that we partnered with before. We need partners, but we need partners across the spectrum. And we need those partners to understand that we have a common objective that's going to create change for everyone. And if you build it on that principle, I think about in Arizona, we had these terrible laws called SB 1070. And they basically created racial profiling of anyone who appeared not just of color, but particularly of Latinos and young Latinx community members. And we had to go so far as to lead a boycott of Arizona because of those laws. But what we found is that because of the threat that boycott created to the economy of Arizona, that even the business community and political leaders on both sides of the aisle understood that they needed to come forward and look at what the impact of that law was and to partner and come together and create change. It is sometimes not necessarily seen as the path that will create common ground, but sometimes, we have to use our voice. We have to use our ability to organize. We have to use the power and the weight of our economy, our agency, because if we aren't using our pocketbooks to make decisions as well, we're not going to get the full leverage of creating that change. So I do think that there are different tactics that can be used that oftentimes we have to use to get the issue to raise to the level so that folks can actually engage and then have those discussions and create the change. But I do think that we can't just work amongst ourselves to create that change. We have to look to reach out across to others and create more like-minded options for everyone.
So new allies, building broader coalitions, the use of economic power. I think about Martin Luther King, Where Do We Go From Here, written over 50 years ago, and the power that he talks about that speaks to exactly what you were just describing, Janet. Jeff and Kimberly, I'm wondering if you have other things to add, but I'm going to toss in one more question just for you to consider. As we know, we are less than 50 days away from an election, a significant election. And I'm wondering what advice you might also offer, particularly for young adults, about the ways that they can organize and to be engaged, particularly as we go into this home stretch. And I know you're speaking to an audience of people who are already heavily engaged, deeply care, believe in the role and the power that they have in their communities. So additional advice that you can give would also be welcome. So
that's great. And I really agree with what Janet has said in framing this. A couple of things I would add. And Janet talked about narrative and what it means. You just think about Black Lives Matter 2 years ago, right? What's going on in Baltimore, that's like a side issue to the world. But a bunch of young folks didn't let it go. They kept hammering away and these videos kept coming out, right? So you had people being shown the truth after the sort of narrative began to go out there that we think something, profoundly evil is happening to Black people in this country. So I want to say these two forces came together. Colin Kaepernick was a side. Now, all of a sudden, everybody can't wait to take a knee. It's just like how quickly that stuff changed because folks didn't give up and kept presenting the truth. And you know what? It's funny because Americans are funny. They don't believe the truth. They don't believe they've been brainwashed. They actually don't understand their history. They actually don't understand the lived experiences of people of color. Now, yes, some people understand it and they're just racist, vile people. But most folks have been able to escape the realities of what it means to not be privileged and white in this country. And we can't take our foot off the gas and exposing these things over and over and over again and creating the narratives. So we know what Bryan Stevenson has done with criminal justice, right? I mean, you just think about how people are changing their views in Michelle Alexander's book and what it did to put that truth out there. Nobody was paying attention at first, right? So sometimes I say to young people, you feel like you're screaming in the wilderness, nobody's paying any attention to you, but circumstances conspire and things begin to happen. That Dr. King's theory about the arc of the universe bending towards justice, boy, it can take a long time sometimes, or sometimes it can happen overnight. I think those of us who have been beaten down by this whole thing, right? I mean, we've never faced anything. When you think about the triple calamities of this country, and then you add what's happening at the federal level, the Attorney General, the President of the United States, Truth and Justice, the CDC, all of this stuff, you could throw up your hands and give up, or you could say we're in the fight of our lives. And if we care about our country and about our communities, we've got to stand up and fight tooth and nail over the course of the next. And it's not going to be, by the way, post the election, we're still going to have COVID. We're still going to have communities devastated. We've got to think the next 18 months, we're going to do everything humanly possible to save our communities. And in doing so, we will save this country. Because if you lose these communities, I am telling you, it is going to be a different America that nobody's going to be proud of if we allow to have happen what's in the lines right now if we don't act.
Fantastic. Kimberly.
Thank you for that, George. Jeffrey, you hit on something that I wanted to hit on as well, which is sustainability. You've got to have a very sustained approach to any issues that you're trying to advance. You know, the Native American community is, you know, has the smallest population of any of the communities in this country. We have to yell and scream the loudest, and we've been yelling and screaming the loudest. I'll use an example of the Washington football team. You know, back in the 90s and Rodney King and such, you know, these waves of movement that have been sustained over the years, you know, the Native Americans were there, you know, talking about historic trauma, the need to change these mascots and such, and the invisibility, you know, we weren't heard no matter how loud we screamed. It really wasn't until George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement really became all-inclusive of our communities, that the corporate sponsors, that's the economic piece of this, got involved. If Nike hadn't gotten involved, if FedEx hadn't gotten involved, I don't know that the Washington football team would have changed its name today. But it speaks to another matter that I want to speak to too, is being prepared. You know, we spent this whole time not just sitting there screaming. We had scientists, researchers, sociology, psychologists doing the data that we needed in order to demonstrate the historic trauma that it caused our communities whenever these mascots depict us in these derogatory ways. And so being prepared for your moment, because you don't know when those moments and opportunities come. But when they do come, you want to seize them. And so that's I think what I have to say. When it comes to the election piece, for those of us who feel invisible at times, for our communities who feel like they don't matter, you know, President Obama said it best, in my opinion: don't boo, vote. You know, the biggest thing we can do to honor our ancestors and our communities is vote. You know, if you can be involved in a campaign, if you can assist in whatever ways in helping formulate policy, if you can be informed and educate yourself, be an informed voter too, because, you know, I think on the ground, education and preparedness are key to, you know, people on the ground.
I would just add briefly, Melody, I know you're probably close to time, but I would just say we have to make a plan to vote. You know, they call this a new normal in this post-COVID and current COVID crisis. There's nothing going to be normal about the way we vote right now. And we need to make a plan. We can vote early. You can vote by mail, vote absentee, or you can go and vote on election day. But you need to make a plan and then make a promise that you'll get your family members, your neighbors, your community, as many people as you can to vote and be an informed voter and actually be a determined voter in this election. That is so crucial for this particular moment that we're in.
Can I just say one additional thing, Melody, because truth matters and facts matter. And I would say to all of us who work with young people, we have to actually make sure they're able to understand facts. You know, it is a fact that white extremism is the most violent thing happening in America. It is the terrorism FBI should be focused on. And the head of FBI said that no matter what somebody else is saying about Antifa and things like these facts, often, if you don't search them out, nowadays, you can be fooled into believing a set of truths that simply will undermine who you are, who your people are, and what your possibilities are. So our kids are under constant assault with messages that undermine them and their confidence in who they are and what the future holds for them. And we've got to make sure we are giving them the ammunition to be able to fight back so they can really be as successful as their talents will allow them to be.
I cannot say it any better than the three of you all have. What a powerful, powerful panel. And you speak to and embody the idea that individuals and individuals who work in collaboration with others in community do shape culture, do shape change, and our politics flow from that. Our democracy flows from that. But ultimately, we do have the ability to bring about change. If you were in the room with the 500 people gathered on this call this morning, I'm sure, based on the comments that I'm seeing coming in, that you would receive a rousing and standing ovation and rousing applause. I want to thank you all for the Opportunity Youth Forum and personally for joining us this morning and sharing your message and your experience. Thank you so very, very much.
More than welcome.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to turn this over to Monique Miles.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be here with all of you. I actually stand before our closing performance by the globally renowned artist Anna Deavere Smith. And so I want to be as quick and as brief as possible so that I can turn our closing time over to Anna. So I want to kick off these remarks by saying thank you again to Melody and to each of our panelists. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Kim, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with our network work while also calling us to action. I also want to kick off my address by saying thank you to the Aspen Forum team. I specifically want to thank Yelena Jamil, Sherry, Mike, Nanette, Juan, and Beck Tower for everything each of you did to make this convening a success. I also want to thank Aspen Conference Services. And last, but absolutely not least, I want to give a shout out to all of our funders, our local, regional, and national funders who make all of our work possible. Thank you for your partnership. So I want to, before we get into the next part of this plenary, I want to give you a sense of what we have accomplished as a national network over the last 8 years. As many of you know who have been with us from the beginning, we launched this national network, the Opportunity Youth Forum, back in 2012 with an investment in 21 rural, urban, and tribal communities. And since our initial launch of our network, that was 8 years ago, our network has grown to include 35 communities in the US and 5 global communities as well. Year after year, thanks to the hard work of our communities and the evaluation efforts of Equal Measure, we have documented metric impact and positive, meaningful system change across our network. Based on our most recent evaluation findings, I want to share some notable areas of progress with you all in hopes that we can take a moment to reflect and celebrate on our progress together. To begin, significant positive change has already happened. It has already been documented across our national network. And based on these changes, we know that even greater change coupled with impact is ahead of us. And we know this because from 2011 to 2019, the numbers of Opportunity Youth in the United States decreased by more than 1.5 million young people. This decline in the national number of Opportunity Youth is thanks to so many of you with us today and the hundreds of people who have worked on this agenda year after year who are not with us but are responsible for this change. And because this is possible, we know that so much more is possible. The second area of progress is related to system change. We know, based on our evaluation findings, that the Aspen Opportunity Youth Forum has been proven to improve local systems for Opportunity Youth. In fact, the Opportunity Youth Forum, which is a collection of almost 36 communities across the US that are home to more than 3.4 million young adults, our network has the potential to touch 3.4 million young adults. Our network saw members improve system outcomes for youth through all of the mid-2010s. The third area of demonstrated progress based on evaluation findings is that consistent participation in a network over time produces results. Let me put a finer point on this. Our 2019 evaluation findings demonstrate that Opportunity Youth Forum Network members that have been participating consistently in the network over the past 5 years have seen strong evidence of system-level improvements for youth. In fact, these communities report improvements on 1.7 more indicators of system-level outcomes. That's almost 2 times better system-level outcomes when compared to other communities. And what does this data point tell us? It tells us that consistent engagement in the network matters, especially as we support communities to implement an ecosystem approach to reconnecting young adults to education and to careers. Another point of progress to reflect on in our evaluation findings is that increased resources for Opportunity to Form collaboratives pays off. To be even more specific, the 2019 evaluation of our network shows that collaboratives with increased organizational capacities achieve more local system level changes that support Opportunity Youth. The key nugget here is that we know funding aimed at supporting the connective tissue work of collaboratives is limited. However, this note reminds us that investing in collaboratives matter because these investments are directly correlated with increased capacity and impact. Therefore, if we want to invest in what works, evidence-based practices that demonstrate impact, then we know that we must invest in collaborative infrastructure and capacity. The final note of progress to share related to the Opportunity Forum Network is that supporting Opportunity Youth, investing in Opportunity Youth pays big dividends for everyone. And let me put a finer point on this finding as well. We know that at a minimum, OIF members are directly supporting more than 10,000 Opportunity Youth per year. Therefore, per year, the network is supporting young adults to attain high school and college degrees and to get jobs. Over the lifetime of each of those 10,000 young people per year, our network level reconnection efforts result in approximately $1 billion in savings to taxpayers. Each year, the Opportunity Youth Forum operates, with an additional $2 billion in other social benefits accrued as well. In other words, every degree attained, every job secured by a former Opportunity Youth results in savings, taxpayer savings, because the level of system engagement is diminished as young people, he, she, or they, advance on pathways that are meaningful to them. To learn more about the ROI of investing in Opportunity Youth, please visit our please visit our website. So, as we collectively reflect on the headlines of our evaluation findings, the greatest takeaways are first and foremost, we know that investments aimed at the attainment of secondary degrees, post-secondary degrees, and connections to careers benefits everyone. Given this, let's continue to invest in our young people. The second takeaway is that investing in collaboratives is necessary given the correlation between capacity and impact. Therefore, we must invest in deepening collaborative infrastructure so that as capacity increases, so does impact. And finally, all of the progress we have made over the past 8 years, year after year, leads us to understand how much more progress is possible as we plan for the future. Let's continue to build on this progress, Aspen family. And now that I've shared those updates on progress, I want to encourage all of our communities in the network to take a moment to reflect on and celebrate your individual community level progress and our collective impact as a national network. Thank you to each of our communities, to all of our partners, to all of our friends, to the entire family working on this agenda for everything that you have done to improve outcomes for young adults. And so much has already been achieved, even as we know that we still have so much more work to do, especially in the face of the triple pandemics we've been discussing this morning, including the health crisis, acts of violence, and the health pandemic. I want to close on the triple pandemics in a moment, but first I want to very briefly share a couple of agenda highlights with you. If you haven't done so already, please visit the convening guide on the Youth Forum event guide on Crowd Compass. Also, if you haven't done so already, please check out and join us on Remo. This is a networking platform where we have actually set up on the second floor places for OIF communities to bring their teams together to reflect on what you're learning in your local work. So we want to encourage you to join us on Remo. And I also want to flag that both before the convenings and after the convening, including this evening, tomorrow morning, and tomorrow evening, we're going to have a live DJ spinning. So we hope that you will join us. I also want to, as a friendly reminder, encourage you all to join us later today at 5:15, where we're going to open with a conversation with Trombone Shorty. We're also going to start promptly tomorrow at noon with a dialogue and some research from Arnold Chandler, and we'll continue to hear from all of our young adult partners. So now I want to close. And in closing, here's what I want to make sure I encourage all of us to continue to reflect on. We know that we have done so much work over the last 8 years, but the most important thing to say is that the work that we have done over the last 8 years has prepared us for the moment we find ourselves in. Over the last 8 years, we have collaborated for impact, and we have specifically worked to build partnerships and networks, both locally and nationally, of resiliency aimed at meeting the needs of our young adults. We have also learned how to use data, not just to inform our strategy, but also for continuous improvement so that we can both set universal goals and target our strategies based on the specific needs of priority populations within our communities. At the same time, over the past 8 years, we have learned how to design, implement, and improve pathways for young adults that not only result in degrees, these pathways center the identity, the intersecting identities of young adults so that first generation students and other young adults from marginalized backgrounds are affirmed in their identity as they also advance in pathways that are meaningful to them. We have learned how to fundraise for this work, both public and private dollars, so that we can innovate, sustain, and achieve impact over time. Finally, we have learned how to advocate for young people in our communities, advocate with them and for them to remove system barriers and to advance policies that foster deeper connections and outcomes. And as I reflect on these learnings, they aren't nearly as important as the two final points I want to lift up before I turn this back to Melody and to Anna. A key learning of our network has been the centering of youth voice and youth leadership to identify, promote, and advance outcomes that are the most impactful and the most meaningful to young adults. By listening to our young adult partners, we have been able to design effective changes in our hearts and in our minds. And perhaps the most important and timely learning of our network, a skill we continue to develop and practice year after year. You heard it on our opening plenary today. It's how to talk honestly about the history of race, racism, and racial injustice and inequity. We have learned how to identify policies that have historically created the disparate outcomes that Black, Latinx, Indigenous populations, and many other young adults of color face, and how to talk honestly about removing these barriers with a racial justice and racial equity lens to ensure greater outcomes, to ensure that system level changes take place that are necessary to meaningfully support and advance our young people. We are able to get at the root cause of these issues to foster greater outcomes for the young people we care about. So what I want to close with, encourage you all to continue to think about is that this moment we are in, it requires us to use these collective skills, most especially the centering of young adults and a commitment to calling out racial inequity and seeking racial justice so that we can co-design intersectional, vibrant, and lasting solutions. Again, because this moment requires us to do so. Thank you all for being here with us today.